Welcome to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. On today's show, Mets radio voices Keith Raad and Pat McCarthy join the show. The guys discuss traveling with the big league club compared to the minors, working with the legendary Howie Rose, and much more. After, Joe and I get into the debate, the hard conversation over selling and what the Mets can get back on this trade market. As always, we close out the show answering your mailbag questions. So subscribe to the Mets Pod on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your shows. Welcome to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. This summer, step out of the office and into the iconic with Cadillac, where the Made to Move sales event provides all the inspiration needed to set your email status to away. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac showroom for the Made to Move sales event today. And here's your reminder to subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Mets Pod. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMayo. And welcome to our radio roundtable. A warm welcome in to Keith Raad, Mets play-by-play for WCBS 880 Radio, and Pat McCarthy, who does the pre- and post games on 880 and does games with Keith when Howie isn't traveling. Guys, thanks for joining us. How are we?
Good to see you guys.
Yeah, doing well. Appreciate you having us.
We're used to hearing you guys. It's good to see you guys, of course. And we got to open with something real simple. How has year one of doing radio coverage for the Mets been for you guys? I know you both have tons of experience at the minor league level, but Keith, we'll start with you and then go to Pat. But what changes come with covering a club at the big league level?
Well, Pat and I talk about this. It's hard to track a fly ball in a big league stadium than it is in a minor league stadium. So that's a lot different with how big these places are. But covering a big league team, to me, it's become it's hard because it's a reality show. Every single day there's a new topic. There's so many different media or times to chat with players and get new stories and get the daily spin, which in the minor leagues we don't really have it because Pat and I are usually the only ones that are in the clubhouse in the minor leagues. But now that we're at the big league level, telling the story of the team, it becomes a lot more dramatic, but a lot easier because it is every single day, and there's so many different writers and voices talking about the team.
Yeah, Keith, I think that's a great point. Is we're used to in the minors being the ones that tell all the exclusive stories, so we get the things from the guys and stuff like that. But at a big league level, there's so many different guys that are going for the headline and stuff like that we don't necessarily get all that. So yeah, I think that's definitely one of the difficult things is trying to make sure that we're getting stories that we can share on the air that maybe people aren't reading immediately all the time. And I think the other thing is that makes it a little bit difficult too is that we're not necessarily in the clubhouse all the time like we were when we were handling media relations responsibilities as well in the minor leagues. We're not handing out stat packs first thing in the morning and stuff like that. So that makes it a little bit difficult, but at the same time, there are a lot of things that make it easy because there's way more information than we could have ever had in the minor leagues. And there's just way more access to, people around the ballpark and stuff like that, because we are dealing with so many different media members too. There's a lot of people to have different conversations with that you can take things from.
And this one, we'll start with Pat and then go to Keith. Simple question. What was the process in getting added to the Mets radio booth this year?
Yeah, Joe, it's an interesting one. So it probably started back in the fall when things started to unfold with Jake Eisenberg leaving for Kansas City, and then eventually with the news that Wayne was heading to the Angels. And from there, it was, just start reaching out to people and hope that, they could listen to my tape and like it. And things probably started to pick up right around Martin Luther King Day. I think that's when the ball started to get rolling in terms of doing some interviews and getting a chance to meet with some people. It was a pretty quick process by the time MLK Day happened to the end of January when news came out that Keith and I were going to be added to the broadcast team. So, it was a pretty fast transition, especially with how late baseball season went. All of a sudden it was the end of November and starting to make a transition into college basketball season. And that only lasted about 2 months before we were back into getting the baseball season rolling. So it started in the fall. There was a little bit of a gap heading into the new year. And then come the end of January, things really started to pick up until we were ready to head down to Port St. Lucie in February.
Yeah, there's so many things that go into getting and in my case, and for Pat's case, getting your dream job, getting to this pinnacle spot that you've been. I mean, I've been grinding for 9.5 years in the minor leagues. You learn to send tapes out to anybody, your cousin, your uncle, your mother, any decision maker you've ever heard of in your entire life, and you hope that something sticks. And as Pat said, Jake getting the opportunity in Kansas City, Wayne getting the opportunity in LA. You have to almost wait for those things in this business to happen so that opportunity opens up. I mean, Howie's been with the Mets for what, 30 years, 35 years, and unless Howie goes somewhere, that spot's not opening up. So that's a lot of it. It has to be a lot of luck and a lot of opportunity and just being in the right spot. But also the hard work, I think, on Pat and on my side was hard work is done to the point where you feel, hey, my stuff is ready for this next level. And then when you get up there, okay, we'll fine tune some things and just start learning at the big league level. But yeah, when I got the call from Odyssey, that was, hey, Chris Olivero said you're going to the show. I'm standing outside of Brooklyn and at Maimonides Park, where I've been slaving away for 5 or 6 years, working hard. It was like, wow, okay, I think he was serious, and let's do this.
That's awesome. And Keith, you touched on Howie, so we'll start with you on this one. What's it like being in the booth and, of course, on the road with a legend like Howie? I mean, obviously just iconic, not just in Mets land, but notably in Mets land to us Mets fans. And you get to see a side in terms of that preparation and routine that not many of us get to witness on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I think that the one thing that sticks out with Howie and this whole experience for me is just how much I laugh every single day. He is hilarious, and I think Mets fans have known that for the number of years that he's been doing games. When this team's doing well, you almost don't hear funny Howie because the team's doing well. I mean, he's kind of the perfect Mets broadcaster for all of the hijinks that have gone wrong for the last how many decades, and he's the one that keeps you entertained and keeps you coming back. The hardest part about this year, though, is the pitch clock kind of limits the amount of stories we can tell, the amount of back and forth we can have. So I know he's got stuff in the tank when the inning ends. Man, I wanted to tell this joke or tell that story. But that experience of I'm rolling on the floor with some of the stories that he tells, the stories that are good for the air and the stories that are not so good for the air that I get to hear. But his preparation as a New York broadcaster, I mean, to me, it's really the big leagues. What I've learned is it's very market to market on what you are expected to provide your audience and how you do that. And when I take over for him, when he's not traveling, I try to do, okay, what would Howie do here? How would he address this injury that happened today, or this call-up that happened today, or this guy's not performing well? I don't want to tell the guy, he's a bum. You can't do that kind of thing. How would Howie, lightly step around someone not doing well? And then when the team is doing well, when there's a big out made, he's taught me to get bigger in the moment. Whereas in the minor leagues, sometimes you have a big moment in the game. Sometimes you have a big moment once a week. But every day you have a moment in the game that you have to identify and be ready for. And Howie Rose has helped me with that in a matter of weeks and months.
Pat, what about you? I mean, obviously you guys are all together and around. And any stories or anything just notable from working alongside someone of that stature in the industry?
Yeah, just echoing what Keith said, I think what's amazing about Howie is who he is on the air is who he is off the air. And we all, quote unquote, turn it on when the microphone is on. Howie doesn't. That's just who he is. Nothing changes. And I think I got a first glimpse of it when we were down in spring training when all three of us were doing games together at the exact same time. And he would show up. He was doing 2 innings. It didn't matter. And it was the 9th inning and nobody knew who was on the field, but he still never missed a pitch, but he still made sure everybody was engaged in a way that they were entertained. And I think that's what makes Howie so special is that he can flip the switch at any moment to go from calling a big moment to just going back to having another conversation. It's like having a fireside chat when it comes to Howie Rose, is because he's just telling stories all the time while still never missing a beat on the air. And what Keith said is so true, is he is one of the funniest people of all time. We were at a dinner one of the first nights of spring training, all of us together, and just watching him hold court in a room as he's going table to table and just having conversations about this person or that person and never skipping a beat. You can take so much from him. And I remember having this conversation with Madge, one of our first road trips, just saying it's amazing how who he is off the air is who he is on the air. And that comes with doing it for so long. And for a guy that doesn't have any formal play-by-play training, he just went out there and did it. and he's done it at the highest level. It's amazing to watch every single day.
This one we'll start with Pat. We'll go to Keith. Let's go to the current state of the club. What's been your biggest takeaway of this disappointing first half? Obviously, being in the locker room now and having that type of access. What's been your biggest takeaway of this first half?
Well, I think for us coming into it, we all had the same expectations that everybody else did, that this team was going to make a run into October and as far as the top of the rotation would take them. So, for me, I think one of the things that's been most disappointing is the fact that we haven't seen this rotation fully take shape yet, whether that's because guys were injured or the Scherzer suspension or the fact that Quintana hasn't pitched yet. I think for me, that's what's so disappointing is that we haven't seen what this roster was supposed to look like and see it for an extended period of time. Kodai Senga is the only one in this Mets rotation that has consistently made a start every single time through, and even he has had to miss a day or two just so that they can give him rest that he's used to for what he was pitching with in Japan. So I think for me, that's one of the most disappointing things is that we haven't really seen it all come together yet to the roster that Billy Epler and Steve Cohen and Buck Showalter wanted this to be. And then obviously there just have been different situations. Now that we thought Pete Alonso was going to make a run at the home run record for the first two and a half months of this season until the wrist injury came down in Atlanta. And since then, he just really hasn't been able to get it going again. So I think there were a lot of storylines that we were really looking forward to seeing early on. And we left California that first road trip, and the team had won 7 of 10, and it just seemed like they were really clicking on all cylinders. So I think we left that road trip on such a high that since then, it just hasn't really held up. So I think that's probably the most disappointing part of it.
Yeah, you hear the phrase, which I'm sure has frustrated fans, track record, and back of the baseball card has echoed enough where it's like, why do they keep saying this? But if you look at every single starting pitcher, including Kodai with his numbers in Japan, and you post their ERA, which is the story of what's happened and what they've given up this year, and their career ERA, which is the back of the baseball card, the track record, even in a guy's best and worst year, he averages X, Y, and Z. All of the pitchers, all of the starting pitchers have had higher ERAs than just what they average in their big league career. Scherzer hasn't pitched as well. He's been banged up this year. Verlander has shown life and spurts, but nowhere close to what he was Cy Young winner last year. Tyler McGill, David Peterson haven't graduated to that big league level where they can just be, hey, your fourth or fifth guy, they're going to give you 5 innings and keep you in the game. And the frustrating part is that we watch the Mets every single day. We see the teams that they play 3 or 4 times a week, and we rotate them out. But when we see Scherzer and Verlander going out there and they're not quite performing, and then you see, I'm not going to say Joe Schmo on the other side going 6 innings, 1 run against the Mets, it's like, wow, are they really that far off? I think so. I guess so, because other teams are pitching well against the Mets, but the Mets are not pitching as well as they should be, even on a basic average level, like we expected them to be.
Pat brought up the West Coast trip, and that's a long stretch, obviously, of travel. It was actually one of the brighter spots of the season for a large part of it, of course, too. What is your favorite part, though, about traveling like that at the big league level? Obviously, there's a lot of different travel that comes with the minor league level, but when you go with the big league team cross country on a long stretch like that, what are the highs of that? It could even be away from the field. And Keith, we'll start with you.
So Pat and I we could talk for an hour about how great it is to travel at the big league level. I mean, to give people a snapshot, I mean, you're walking onto a charter flight with first class seats, and you have a lot of room, and they come around with a menu and what would you like to drink, and you try not to order every single thing ever and get the freshman 15, but that's amazing. We were just at a hotel in Phoenix. It was 117 degrees. We're at a resort, and I was out by the pool, and the hardest thing I had to do that day was try not to get sunburned. Like, these are the different things that we're experiencing at the major league level, at least from my perspective, that it is pretty cool. Some of the perks that we get and some of the places that we stay, not too bad.
What about you, Pat?
Yeah, I mean, just everything that Keith just said. For the last, for Keith, the last decade, for me, the last 6 years, when we're traveling, it's 12 hours on a bus, and And I felt like I was spoiled in AAA. I had 2 buses. Keith in A-ball was dealing with 1 bus the entire time. And so when you get onto the charter flight and you just sit back and just know that from the time the game ends to wheels up, 2 hours are going to go by. We walked into the hotel in San Diego last week, and I looked at Keith and I said, can you believe that we just played a game in Arizona and here we are 3 hours later, we're at the hotel in San Diego. There's just no stress in terms of the travel, which I think is pretty incredible. And I love getting a chance just to explore new cities, all the time, using off days, using the days where we have night games where we can go around and see different places. One of the things I loved about traveling in minor league baseball was it took us to different cities that maybe outside of that we never would have gone to, whether that's like a Toledo, Ohio, or different places like that. Whereas in the big leagues, it's the opposite. You're going to the big cities that, maybe it's a vacation spot or something like that, but there's still different things that you get a chance to do. You get a chance to see different sites. When we were in Arizona, I used the off day to go to Sedona and different things like that, like places that maybe you wouldn't have had a chance to go to on a vacation. So it's a pretty surreal experience when you walk on the plane. And like Keith said, you just sit down in your chair, you sit back and you just let everything else fall into place. So it's pretty special. It's an eye-opening experience. And I always think it's interesting too when minor league guys come up for the first time and you think about the fact, like, man, they were sitting on a bus for 13 hours a week ago, and here they are on a chartered flight to go to another major league city. So that's always a pretty cool thing too.
And that's a perfect segue. This one is for you, Keith. You mentioned the years that you spent with the Brooklyn Cyclones. So you've seen every homegrown player that's on the Mets right now come through Brooklyn, basically. What do you think Met fans should expect from Ronny Mauricio when he gets here?
Yeah, Ronny, I'm really kind of perplexed at what the Mets are doing with Ronny, because what he did in the winter with winter ball and coming into spring training, and I mean, he hit 450 plus foot home runs in spring. He was ready. He was season ready to go in front of Mets brass, and then what he's done at AAA has been master it. To be honest with you, I think he's mastered AAA, which is an old school way that minor league players used to come up instead of like Francisco Alvarez play 50 games and go. Mauricio is destroying at AAA. They're trying to teach him second base, trying to get him comfortable there, because Francisco Lindor has shortstop locked up for a very long time, and he should. But Ronny's power from both sides of the plate, he's very smooth defensively. And as I was coming up through the system, and we had Baty, Alvarez, and Mauricio on the same team in 21. It was a hell of a lineup. A lot of people, scouts included, said at their best, at their peak potential of the three, Ronny's got the highest ceiling, which is incredible because we haven't seen him yet. We've seen how good Alvarez is. Brett Baty came on strong. He's learning the last month or so, I'd say. But Ronny at his best could be better than both of those guys. I just do wonder, they haven't sent him to the Futures game ever. I don't really know why they're kind of hiding him. But I'd like to see him up here pretty soon.
Yeah, I think we would too. So, listen, I'll start with you for this one, Pat, and Keith, you can close us out here. Last question. If I put you guys in charge, and obviously there's a lot to unpack here, but how would you go about this upcoming trade deadline? These are conversations that Joe and I have on the podcast every week. And of course, it's dictated by how the following week can go. It's almost crunch time now. There's a strong argument to sell every single piece possible that there is no team control of the next year or 2 years from now. There's a mini argument to stand largely pat and just see what happens. But, I mean, it's a tough decision. That's why these guys get paid the big bucks. What would you do, starting with you, Pat?
First, I'm just really happy that I don't have to make those decisions, right? Because I think it's a really difficult one. I think it's hard to sell to the guys on the team right now that maybe wouldn't be traded. Hey, this just isn't it, because this is a veteran group that most of these guys signed in New York with the thought process that this team was going to contend for a World Series. So to say, no, 2023 isn't it, we're going to go for it again in 2024. For some of these guys that are 36, 37, 38 years old, that's hard, because you're banking on 1 year later going back to what they were 3 years ago versus what they were this year. So I think that's going to be a really hard sell to some of the veteran guys to say, hey, you're sticking around but we're selling off X, Y, and Z. So there's an argument to be made, though, like you said, to sell the guys that are on one-year deals. If you think that in 12, 13 days, when the trade deadline comes, the team is still in the same place. If you're still 7 games below 500, if you're still chasing 3 or 4 teams in the wild card, it's hard to justify not selling off some of the guys that are on the one-year deal. So I think Billy Epler's been pretty transparent about it, that if he's going to listen to the best options available, and at the same time, I think you still have 10, 12 games that all of a sudden, if you rattle off 8 wins during that time and you think, okay, now maybe we're only chasing 2 teams, maybe you don't make any crazy moves like trading for a Shohei Ohtani or something like that. But hey, maybe you do go get another bat in the middle of the lineup, or maybe you do go get a bullpen piece. But I think it's going to be a decision that's not going to be made until July 30th, 31st, and even into August 1st when 4 p.m. comes. I just think too much can change between now and then. But as it stands right now, I think you have to listen to every possible offer that comes to you as a way to bolster your rotation or bolster your farm system, because Steve Cohen has said that the recipe that the Mets have right now of bringing in free agents and signing them to these lucrative contracts is not a recipe for winning long term. It's a recipe to win right now until the farm system gets better. So if you can get the farm system better while still holding on to some of your key pieces, I think you have to listen.
Yeah, to be honest, there are teams that have in the past been able to break it down and sell while also being competitive the following year. Like, that's totally possible for the Mets. And like Pat said, Justin Verlander came here because he knows he's in the twilight of his career, sometimes still pitching at a very elite level, not just the twilight where he's throwing 86 miles an hour and hanging on. But he came here for the sheer reason to win, and so did Max Scherzer. I'm sure there were 43 million other reasons why they came here per year. But the creative thing that you have with Steve Cohen is that the Eduardo Escobar deal, not taking anything away from Eduardo Escobar, but the Mets basically bought 2 prospects from the Angels for $4-something million, and they got college arms, college pitchers. And what does that mean to the fan listening? Those guys are AA, maybe AAA ready, as opposed to a young high school low-A kid who's going to take a while to get to the major leagues. The Mets flat out need big league ready arms, AA, AAA arms. You saw that with the draft. I mean, I think it was 15 college arms. That the Mets knew, hey, we need to stockpile as much as possible with arms that could, 1 or 2 of them could hit as a big league starter. I mean, Tyler McGill was an 8th round pick, which is a steal. No one knew that was coming. You need more of those guys, and I think you can do that with offloading some 1-year deals of guys that, to be honest with you, David Robertson could give you a huge return. I mean, if you were a team that's right there on the precipice of you need a big reliever to lock down a game to stay in the wild card, he's a huge piece. It's hard to find a guy like David Robertson. He's pitched so well this year. You can get a pretty good haul from that. But I'm very interested to see the creativity that Steve Cohen has given Billy Epler with, hey, I don't think they're going to be able to sell Scherzer and the $43 million that he's due next year with a player option, but the other deals that are in there, if teams don't want to pay the rest of some of these contracts that the Mets have. So creative, but we're getting to the point where it's starting to see the writing on the wall here and start to build for the future.
Of course, you can listen to Keith and Pat on WCBS 880 Mets radio broadcast and check them both out on Twitter at Keith Raad and at Pat McCarthy _. Thanks, guys. It's been awesome talking to you. It's been awesome listening to you. It's exciting to get, of course, new voices. We love the old voices, but it's always exciting to get new voices. And it's really cool to hear how long both of you grinded at the minor league level and seem to be living that dream life now. So thanks again.
Thanks, guys. Thanks,
yeah, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Once again, thanks to Keith and Pat for joining us this week. And a reminder, you're listening to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. You could subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch our episodes on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your shows. All right, Joe, you know how we're getting right into it. The for sale sign. This is the grand debate right now. It's in every single writer's article. It's taken over portions, of course, of broadcast content. It's the conversation amongst the fan base as well, wherever you have those conversations, largely still Twitter. Rest in peace to Threads that didn't hang on too long, it seems like, if you were ever there. Are you there yet, Joe? I mean, honestly, I understand we can do the thing we've done every single week. That is, well, let's see how this series goes. Let's see how this trip goes. But the reality is right now, our words were, you got to, after they lost that last game before the All-Star break, because you felt like if you took 2 out of 3 against San Diego, you're like, okay, Things are really trending in the right direction, where if you do that again out of the All-Star break, they've got a shot here. You lost 2 or 3 to San Diego. You come out of the break, you lose 2 or 3 to the Dodgers. By the way, even in the win, the offense non-existent is what I would call it, against a portion of the Dodgers rotation that you're supposed to hit, right? Kershaw, who's having an incredible year, is on the IL right now, so you missed him. It feels like right now, Joe, when you look at where the pendulum is starting to swing, it's leaning heavily into sell mode, and it's probably time to have that honest conversation.
Yeah, I think the politically correct, and the thing is, just see how the next 2 series go, 3 series
which you have to do.
Yeah, they have to play the baseball games, so that is certainly a factor. They have to show up to the park. They have to play. I don't think there's going to be any forfeiting going on, so they do have to play. But I mean, the reality, and Pat said it before, I don't even think 8 wins is enough. I think they need to go basically undefeated for the rest of the month in order to really change their fortunes at all. I look at it as it's time to sell, and I am ready to sell right now. I think anybody that is a rental is clearly on the block. So that's David Robertson, who I believe will get you a good return. Tommy Pham, Mark Hanna. If you could, I'd listen on Brooks Raley, even though he has a year of control. He's been good. Sometimes that extra year of control can net you more of a return. I'd listen on him. I'd certainly listen on Adam Ottavino, but that player option for next year, I think, makes him probably pretty hard to trade given how he's pitched. And then Max Scherzer, Justin Verlander, that's the big conversation. And if I were in charge, which much like Pat and Keith said, probably a good thing I'm not, but if I were in charge, I would be making a hard push to trade one of them, whichever one nets me more value. And obviously eating some money is going to be a factor. I think you certainly need to eat probably the rest of this year and maybe even a chunk of next year. But I think when you look at where this team is headed, Steve Cohen said it at his press conference, it's an older team that's going to get a year older. So Max is going to be 40, I think, and Verlander will be 41. And Senga's under contract. Quintana's under contract. The rotation hasn't been good enough. You basically can make one change to it in the offseason. To me, that's not enough change. So I would be as aggressive as reasonably possible. Obviously, I'm not going to give them away for nothing. But if anything is evidence, it's the Eduardo Escobar trade. Coleman Crow, Landon Marceau, we'll see what they end up. But they got 2 top 20, 30 prospects in the Mets system for a guy that didn't play at all just because they paid the money. So if you pay David Robertson, you could get a good return there. You pay Tommy Pham, you could get a pretty good return there. You pay Mark Hanna, maybe it's similar to an Eduardo Escobar type of return. But if you pay down Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander, something people just aren't taking into account because it doesn't happen very often at the trade deadline. Teams frequently want to shed the money. There is increased value when you just tell a team, Justin Verlander, Max Scherzer, they may not be pitching the way they have in their prime, but they can help you in your stretch run, and they cost you the prorated veterans minimum. So I think anyone that's putting out there that you're going to get nothing for those guys, I think they're completely misguided.
I think so too. I think it also helps right now, Joe, that in Max's last 5 starts, he's gone at least 6 innings in 4 of them. I mean, in 3 of those starts, he's given up 2 earned runs or less. And once again, even the 1 start, against Arizona, 6 innings, 4 earned runs, but he got beat up by the long ball. But still, that Max is pitching deep into games now, and he is starting to look a little bit more consistent, where if you look at some of the contenders in baseball right now, and some of them have loaded farm systems to the point where they can't even bring anyone else up anymore, you do wonder. And coincidentally, a lot of those teams are teams that don't spend any money, right? They don't want to spend any money. So if they have prospects that are, I don't want to say upper tier, but maybe mid upper tier, is that fair? And then you cover one big thing, that's money they don't want to spend, and they have a huge need for starting pitching. Well, then somebody like Max starts to become valuable. You and I texted a pretty long time about how we feel like it might have to be Max over Verlander. When you look at the structures of the contract, Verlander could be under contract for the next 2 years with that vesting option that's based on innings pitched next year. I think it's a situation where it feels more realistic that Max would be the one. And teams honestly might see more in Max right now because Verlander, as much as the stuff is there, the control hasn't been there and he's been wildly hot and cold, where Scherzer's been a little bit more consistent recently. So that's going to be the big conversation because we feel like if the Mets do go into sell mode, and I understand some people don't like talking about this, but this is the reality of this team right now where it's not sell mode that of the past where it's blow it all up. Pete Alonso would be in that conversation if it was, right? This is not that conversation. This is kind of, hey, guys that we're really going to lose or don't think are a part of the solution next year, let's get value back for them right now, continue to stockpile the farm system. We have a competitive advantage in two ways, right here, right, Joe? The competitive advantage in number one is that you can pay down contracts to increase the prospect return now. And then number two, the competitive advantage carries over into the offseason because in most years, you'd be like, well, how do you trade one of Max or Verlander because you're opening maybe another hole in the rotation next year? Look at the starting pitching market in free agency next year. You just pay for another frontline starter because I don't think Steve Cohen really cares that much. I think they'll do it again. And obviously these guys in the market, Nola, even Snell, Giolito, they're not 38, 39 years old. You're going to be looking at more term with those contracts, but on the flip side, they are younger guys where what we've seen go wrong with Verlander and Max at this age, you feel like that risk is a little bit more limited with them. So, man, it's a lot to unpack. This could be a wildly busy deadline for the Mets if those guys are involved, but I feel like at a minimum right now, you're getting a good piece back for David Robertson. You're getting a mid-tier piece back for Tommy Pham, and I like your comparison of Mark Canha to maybe the Escobar trade. Maybe since it's at the deadline, it won't be as much. It would be one of the two caliber players that they got back, but you know why I don't even fear it right now, Joe? And maybe this is our nature, you and I. Our birth of our podcast was built more on draft, farm system, young player development. We love the big league club. We care about winning, but we've always fallen back on that. I want to see Ronny Mauricio and Mark Vientos play the entire second half. I find that more enjoyable, even if they go through young player struggles, than what we're witnessing right now. What we just witnessed 3 games offensively against the Dodgers. I'm ready to move on to that.
That's exactly what I was going to say is when you make these trades, yeah, you're not exactly even punting 2023 entirely. It's not like you're blowing
What's the
team
difference
up like
besides Robertson?
Yeah.
What is the difference?
Yeah, they'd be obviously down a closer, and maybe Brooks really takes that closer's job or something like that. And you
by the way, I'd keep him. I know you brought that up. I do worry a little bit about just blowing up the bullpen. Right. I Raley and Diaz in 2024 plus another addition. I feel good about that. So that's my one thing for keeping Raley. I'd really have to be blown away.
Yeah, it'd have to be a good deal. Otherwise, I'm playing to keep him. But I'm taking Ronny Mauricio. I'm throwing him in left field every day. Sink or swim. Deal with the errors or whatever, blunders because he's really learning the outfield for the first time. Mark Vientos would be my everyday designated hitter because the reality is they are going to spend again this offseason and they need to be able to assess their young players and have a sample size to say, do we need to spend big on a left fielder? Do we need to spend big on a DH? Keep Ohtani out of the conversation. But even without him as a part of it, can Mark Vientos be the DH, or do they need to go sign someone in free agency? And one thing I would consider too, and maybe this goes under the radar, I think they should be sellers. Obviously, I've been very clear to that. But when you look at the bullpen, it doesn't appear there's even much coming that's going to be of impact in the system in 2024. I would be open to buying too. If I could buy a reliever that's under control beyond this year, I know Kendall Graveman's coming in from the White Sox. He's due, I think, $8 million next year. He could be a potential guy, depending on what they're asking for. If it's not a key cog type of prospect, I would consider buying a reliever or two in addition to selling my pieces. And you take a little from the farm, you add more to the farm, but you also set yourself up in 2024 where you don't need to go sign 3 relievers in free agency, which we always know the crapshoot that free agency relievers are. So that's something I'd even consider too. So I hope Billy Epler and, Steve Cohen obviously is going to financially support whatever Billy Epler wants to do. I hope he's at least considering the possibility and looking around to see what relievers are available that are under control beyond this year. Barlow with the Royals could potentially be available. He might cost a little more, so that's a higher end deal, but I'd consider that too. I don't want 2023 to be repeated in 2024. So how can they approach this trade deadline to make it more likely that 2024 is a bounce back and not a repeat is really Billy Epler's job.
It's a good point. The prospects that you target or the players that you target also go into the strategy where this Mets team, for the most part, I don't think is going to be looking to get a return on a ton of A-ball pitchers that are dart throws with good stuff, and maybe in 4 years there'll be something. I would imagine some of the return is guys in AA or AAA that might be pigeonholed into being one-inning guys at the next level. They aren't ready to help their club this year, but could make the Mets next year and be a 6th-inning guy, be a 7th-inning guy. And that's the kind of return that is more retooling. Yes, you are essentially out on this year, but you are getting returns that can make a significant impact in 2024, not just guys that are 2026, 2027 projections.
Yeah, I mean, I hope they don't do too much of that. I want to get the best talent we can. I think I said this to you when we were at the Cadillac Club doing that show. I think they would lean, like if talents were similar, they'd rather a closer to big league ready than further away. But I always go back to the Zach Wheeler trade, and they could have easily traded for closer to big league ready Gary Brown and Heath Hembree. Instead, they took Zach Wheeler.
That's a good point.
So I'm not opposed, but I think when push comes to shove, I would imagine most of the pieces they'll acquire will be AA, AAA level. But David Robertson, I think, has a chance to net you the biggest return. And in that case specifically, I want the best prospect I can get. And if that person happens to be in high A, so be it. The reality is you're going to need pitching down the road too. So you need it next year, but it'd be great. Like Ben Brown, who the Cubs got for David Robertson last year. He was in high A last year, and now he's a top 100 prospect in AA a year later. And, he's, a year out from the major leagues at this point, but obviously that was a significant return for them. So I'm not opposed to kind of replicating that, to be honest.
All right, before the mailbag, we're going to quickly jump back on the scoreboard this week. We had given it a rest through my vacation. We did a live show at the Cadillac Club, and of course, all of our coverage with the MLB draft. But we're not giving up. Joe and I will compete until the very end. This competition seems a little bit more lively than the Mets right now. We are not selling on the Mets pod here. Reminder of our current score. I'm up 11-10, Joe. I didn't even remember that. So thank you to our producer, Jeff, for reminding me that I have a 1-point lead, a narrow lead. Here we go for this week. 6 games before our next episode. Chicago White Sox are in town for 3. Then the Mets go to Boston for 3. Over-under push is set at 2 for the Mets wins. Joe, I'm giving you the floor. What do you like?
Man, it's sad that we're doing a 6-game over-under win, and it's 2.
And the White Sox are 3 of the games.
And the White Sox are 3. Though they played the Braves pretty good. So
I'm going to push. I enjoyed that. Yeah. Shout out to the White Sox.
Yeah, I'm going to push. Maybe the White Sox are turning it on just like a little bit, and maybe they'll be kind of annoying. And you go to Fenway, you never know what's going to happen in Boston. And, despite Boston being in 4th place, they're still, I think, like 6 or 7 games over 500.
7 games over 500, yep.
Yeah, the AL East is a monster this year. So I'll push. I'll say the Mets will go 2-4. And then this time next week, there will be no more, well, let's see what happens for the next series or two before the deadline. It'll be done at that point.
I'm going to take the over. I think it gets to 3, by the way. Let's not act like I think they're winning both of these series. I want to be very clear here. That's a bonus. 2 is a low number, Joe, and you are playing the numbers wisely. As a true betting man, you should be taking 2 or less. I am going to go with a little bit of hope here and say they go over. The next one is Francisco Alvarez home runs over these next 6 games. The over-under push is set at 2. Alvarez is wildly streaky, Joe. This is you don't just push on this one. You either go over or under with Alvarez. He's obviously been playing, it feels like 90% of the time. I almost forget Narvaez is on the team most of the time at this point. Ooh, for Alvarez, man, I'm going to go with the under here, Joe. I think it cools off. I think we see 1 or maybe 0. Obviously, he's not going to play all 6 of those games. They don't just DH him all the time either. I will go with the under for Alvarez and say he kind of mellows out a little bit. What do you like here?
You mentioned Omar Narvaez. Add him to the list of people I'd listen to on trade. But back to Alvarez. I'm going to also go under, but I feel like he's either going to hit 0 or 1, or he's going to hit like 6.
5.
Like,
Yeah.
That's it. 5 or 6.
Well, he also
Like, he's gonna
bats
homer
8th
almost
still,
every
which
day.
helped me make my. If he was batting 3rd every day, I honestly would have done
Yeah.
push or over. He doesn't bat in the top 6 of the lineup, which is really good for a baseball team that needs offense right now, by the way.
Yeah. Under.
Fun year.
Fun year. But hey, a lot of fun stuff that we've seen from Francisco Alvarez. A lot of things to look forward to, kind of regardless of where he's batting. But something tells me if the next 6 games go as kind of I expect, and the second half is selling and young players, I think even Buck Showalter will have to bat Francisco Alvarez higher in the order. But for this sake, I'll go under.
All right, our next one is Jose Quintana's debut. How many innings? The over-under push is set at 4 here, Joe. What do you like?
Over. His pitch count is up to,
wow.
I think he threw 85, 90 pitches in a ramp up for this start. But that's not me saying I think he's going to go 7 innings. He could go 4 2/3. He could go 5. So I will go over 4 on Jose Quintana. And I do genuinely, and you and I texted about this the other day. Like you said, we were talking a lot of different things kind of off the show. I have some hope for Jose Quintana. Like, he doesn't need to be a 2.7 ERA Jose Quintana, but like if he could pitch like a number 4 starter, that's precisely what the Mets need. And if you're a number 4 starter, you got to be able to do more than 4 innings. And it's against the White Sox, so he has a decent chance.
All right, so I'm going to push here. I think it goes right to 4. I think they'll be a little cautious with Quintana, but I like the point you bring up. You and I have had this conversation. The Mets could sell at the deadline. There are still very important things for this Mets season in the second half, and Quintana is at the front of that, because if Quintana shows to be a serviceable number 4 or number 5 the second half of the season, that can answer a massive question for next year when you're trying to figure out this rotation. The guy that's overachieved is Senga, which is great going into next year. Can Quintana at least reach what he was expected to do or overachieve? I'm not going to say that balances out Scherzer and Verlander significantly underachieving, Peterson as well, but you're trying to get answers for the rotation next year, and Quintana has a chance to be a part of that solution. Okay. The next one. Is Max Scherzer's next start a quality start? As I said earlier with Scherzer, when you look at, reminder, quality start, 6 innings, 3 earned runs or less. His last 5 games, Scherzer has done that 3 of the 5 here, Joe. So I will go with yes on this one. I think Max is he's got a little extra right now. He seems confident in the post game that he's figured a couple of things out. I also wonder, this is a wild assumption, maybe too big of an assumption. I wonder if Max does feel a little bit of an audition right now. We know how much he cares about winning. And let's be honest, he wasn't part of the solution to the first half of much of the Mets season, ironically. But I do think there's a little bit extra on right now for Max Scherzer. I think he goes 6 innings, 3 runs or less.
His post-game confidence, I think, was big. And it just shows how little we kind of know about pitching, despite thinking we know. He's like, yeah, my slider figured it out. It was my left foot. Okay, I don't know what with his left foot was causing slider problems, but it seems like he fixed it, and his last start, things looked a lot better. I actually feel good about Max right now. I think he will throw a quality start. I think 6 innings is a good number for him. 6 innings, 2 runs, something like that. Keep the team in the game. And he's been asked more than once about waiving his no trade clause. So he's clearly not naive to the fact that he could potentially be on the move. So maybe he pitches a little better, and that helps him, helps the Mets. And unfortunate, it clearly didn't work here, but I think Max throws another quality stars next time out.
All right, we'll close out with the last one. Joe, you get to start with this one. Justin Verlander, if he throws a quality start. For Verlander's last 5 starts, he has only done that twice. I think the issue with Verlander, a majority of the time, is really length right now, Joe. 2 of the 5 starts, he only went 5 innings, which automatically disqualifies him. His longest outing, or tied for his longest outing, he went 7 innings against the Astros, but he gave up 4 earned runs. So he only did it against the Giants, where he threw 7 innings and no earned runs. And then, of course, against the Padres, 6 innings and 2 earned runs. What do you like here, Joe? This is probably the hardest question on the scoreboard this week, I would think.
I'm going to say no. Right now, it just seems he's not able to put away batters in quick enough time where the pitch count is just up there. I mean, it's 75 in the 4th inning. It's 80 in the 4th inning. He's throwing far too many pitches, and that's been a kind of one of the few consistent trends that he's had. So I'll say I think he'll pitch into the 6th and maybe not make it through. So 5 1/3, 5 2/3. So I'm going to say no to Justin Verlander's next start being a quality start.
I'm going no as well. I think it's just, man, these 20 pitch first innings or 25 pitch second innings. And this is somebody in Verlander, like he can throw 108 pitches on a night, and it's just not getting it done. Even if he goes 5 innings and gives up 2 earned runs, we are talking quality start here. Getting to that 6 inning mark for Verlander is a difficult task right now. It's hard to predict anything other than a no, and maybe he'll surprise us. Those are our scoreboard predictions for the week. Of course, we will recap them on next week's show. As we always do, we will close this thing out with your mailbag questions. And Joe, we are starting off with one that is just as simple as it gets. This is from our listener, Dan B. He just said, Brett Baty, discuss.
Brett Baty obviously has struggled for the last month plus. When he came up, looked really good. He struggled, and I understand everyone's very emotional right now, and obviously it's a bad look to drop a pop-up the way he did, or he didn't even drop it. He just missed it and then hit him in the face. But
trajectory was, did you see the animation of the trajectory?
Like that.
I'm not making excuses, but no. I just want to be clear. Like that pop-up does not define Brett Baty right now. It was a little ridiculous.
Yeah. It honestly looked like the slice off my golf swing. Like it was just fading hard to the right. But look, Brett's been actually largely fine defensively. You know, he's above average, outs above replacement. Like he's okay. And that's kind of what I have said for the last couple of years on this show. And then where we were before this show, like he's not going to be a great third baseman, but he's going to be a fine third baseman. And offensively, he's hitting too many ground balls. And that's always when Brett Baty struggled, is when he's not hitting the ball in the air, because he could hit it hard. I mean, how often are you looking at the top exit velocities of the game? And Brett Baty's on the list, but he went 0 for 3. So he's hitting the ball hard. And when he figures it out, it's when he starts elevating. I am not worried about Brett Baty long-term. Maybe I'm crazy, but I still think I believe in the bat. I believe in the talent. I believe in the person, because, you know, he's made a couple, mistakes, or physical mistakes over the last, month or so. And he has no problem just standing in front of the media, taking it, putting it on himself, and, working to learn. He's a hardworking kid. I think Brett Baty is going to be fine. And honestly, if you go back and you look for young players that had successful big league careers, the list of them that had poor rookie campaigns is as long as anything. And the list of guys that just came on the scene and dominated from day one is much shorter. So I'm not giving up on Baty in any sense yet. But right now it's kind of one of those things where it's when it rains, it pours, and it's pouring really hard in Queens.
Yeah, giving up on him was just, the guy's 23. I think, honestly, Joe, the biggest disappointment for me is just the lack of power right now. Yeah. That's the one thing where I'm like, okay, I'd like to see a little bit more power from Brett Baty. I personally think in the long haul, he's going to be a guy that has no problem hitting 270 plus. Honestly, I don't worry about the batting average. If he's even mediocre or just solid defensively, then great. And yes, there are, you get the blooper reel that might define a season or try to define a season defensively. But like you said, in the larger sample size, he's been fine. The arm is a big arm. We saw him make the play, the throw to second base recently. So I'm not hitting the panic button on Brett Baty. It just goes back to, it's magnified because everybody on the team outside of Tommy Pham and Francisco Alvarez, and large part Francisco Lindor, has been pretty terrible this year, right? Like, I know that's harsh to say, and Nimmo's been solid, honestly, solid. When you look at Pete right now, this is the worst we've seen him since the shortened season. And let's not forget, I think it was the last week of that shortened season in 2020 that he got wildly hot, but really 40 or 50 of those 60 games, he was lost. And this looks like that. McNeil, this is the worst I've seen him in a Met uniform, I want to say. This is the worst we've seen Marte. I mean, when everybody's struggling, people look at the saviors and get upset that they're not 23-year-old heroes, especially when Francisco Alvarez, who's one of the biggest anomalies we've seen in baseball at the catching position ever. I mean, the conversation with Francisco Alvarez is, can he catch Johnny Bench's home run record? That Johnny Bench. So maybe I sound like I'm defending Brett Baty too much, but I just think it's magnified because everything is wrong with this team in large part right now. So, all right, one more here, Joe. This is right up your alley, this question. And ironically, something we have texted about a little bit. This is from Pete, who asked, I saw Jack Leiter is down to number 5 on the Rangers prospect list. I believe in Leiter's draft. Wasn't he taken 2nd overall, Joe?
Sure was.
Yep.
Sure was.
Pete said, has he been struggling in their system? Do you think the Mets could swing a deal for him at the deadline with David Robertson as the main piece going to Texas?
I would love to get Jack Leiter for David Robertson. He has struggled in Texas's system for sure. He has an ERA over 5 this year, and I think he had an ERA over 5 last year. So
he did, yes.
Right, yeah. So he's struggled since really turning pro. And his struggles this year are home runs and walks. He's not giving up hits. He's striking guys out, but it's home runs and it's walks. Texas, no offense to their player development system, they don't have a rich history of developing pitchers. And that is the idea of this new player development system for the Mets is they're going to try to find things that maybe other teams cannot. Like you've seen what they've done with Tyler Stewart, with Blade Tidwell, with Christian Scott, with Mike Vassell, with guys like that. They've changed them and made them better pitchers. And that's obviously a very small sample size of this development system. But you let me get my hands on Jack Leiter right now, and I'll throw him right in the Binghamton rotation, and we'll get to work on him and fix him up real good and make him the big league starter that clearly he has the potential to be. And it would be super fun to see, Al Leiter, his father, obviously being a Mets Hall of Famer now and one of the icons of the late 90s, early 2000s Mets teams. It'd be really cool to have his son in the Mets system. That was kind of always the dream. I remember, Connor, us answering a mailbag question about Leiter versus Rocker. And is there any way Leiter will make it to the Mets? And he didn't, and Rocker did, and that everything transpired there. I don't know if David Robertson gets you Leiter, even though he fell to number 5. He's still a top 100 guy in baseball. So I don't know if Robertson necessarily gets you an immediate top 100 guy, but Texas could be a team in on Scherzer. And Jack Leiter would be one of, honestly, the pieces I'd be very interested in bringing into the fold because the stuff is still there. So I believe that if you work with him, you can get a lot more out of him and bring Jack Leiter home. Let's do it.
It would be awesome. My logic tells me that after using the 2nd overall pick on him just 2 years ago, Texas is not exactly enthusiastic about, especially with DeGrom out for a very long time now, at the idea of giving up on Leiter. He's 23. He's not pitching well in AA ball right now. Now, to your point, Joe, he is striking out almost 12 batters over 9 innings. So the stuff is still tremendous, but the overall production and lack thereof is a problem where you look at David Robertson and go, man, I don't think that is the return as good as Robertson is, and he has no team control next year. But if you want to talk about a larger package, that's when he becomes very, very intriguing because, I mean, listen, it's maybe he needs a fresh start somewhere. Who knows? Once again, I don't think Robertson gets it done, but it would be really, really cool if they got Leiter and got him in the pitching lab and tweaked a couple things to get him back to being the promising player that he was thought of as a draft-eligible prospect. This is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. This summer, step out of the office and into the iconic with Cadillac, where the made-to-move sales event provides all the inspiration needed to set your email status to away. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac showroom for the made-to-move sales event today. And a reminder to subscribe to our show, the Mets Pod, at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcast. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll catch you next week.